What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. So I saw some sad news today. When I saw it, it really saddened me, man. Look, we all, when we see people that we grew up watching or read about and they pass away, you kind of get a little melancholy. But this one is especially sad for me, man, and I'll tell you why. Um, if you've been following my channel for at least the last 6 months, you might recall a video I did on Dick Allen back in August. And I talked about how I felt like he deserved to be in the Hall of Fame, and I thought that he was currently the best player in Major League history not to be in the Hall of Fame. And what's so ironic and sad about this whole situation is that had COVID not hit this country, um, the Veterans Committee would have met yesterday, and more than likely they would have voted Dick Allen into the Hall of Fame. But they postponed it because of the ongoing situation. Right? And here we are, a day after what would have been a joyous day in his life, some 43 years after he retired, and he passes away. He died at the age of 78. I don't know the cause of death, but I have been reading that he was in failing health, which is one of the reasons why I did that video back in August. And I don't know if it's a link. I only have 25,000 subscribers these days because of YouTube's tactics. I only, get a couple of hundred views a video now. But it was refreshing to read that about 2 weeks or so after I did that video, the Philadelphia Phillies decided to retire um, Dick Allen's number 15. And this is my thing. This is why I believe he should be in the Hall of Fame. First of all, I think that he was about 10 years. Uh, his debut, or I'll put it like this, to put it more simply, he came along 10 years too early. He started playing in the early 1960s when we were still in the heart of the Jim Crow era in the South. Um, the farm team that he played on was in Arkansas, which is Arkansas 1963. Yeah, Little Rock, Arkansas, that era. Come on. I mean, it's a. I mean, it was one of the worst areas in the South as far as racism is concerned. And I think it's the first time that he ever really dealt with in your face racism like that. And he was jeered. He had, fans throwing shit at him, calling him nigger, calling him everything in the book, and of course didn't get away with it. And he had a terrible time, a terrible experience in the minor league system in that city. And things didn't really get that much better for him when he went to the pros with the Philadelphia Phillies. Many of his teammates didn't like him, especially the white ones. Management didn't treat him right. He was not paid what he should be paid. And the fans, despite, the fact that he was a productive player for the most part, they jeered him. And management treated him terribly as far as like just, where they would put him at in the field. Dick Allen was 190 pounds, right? He was a real bulky 190 pounds, like a solid guy. Um, but sometimes they would have him at second base. Second base is more for a speedy guy with lateral quickness. That was not Dick Allen. So of course he would develop injuries, probably like to his ankles and shit like that. And when you're a black player, back then especially, if you complain about anything, you're a whiner. Oh, this one's a complainer. This guy's a complainer. They move him to left field. He didn't quite have the speed to cover left field. He might complain about that. You know, Then they start looking at him as not being a team player, being a complainer, yada yada yada. And of course, if management is putting that out there, and the black player give his side, who do you think that white people are going to side with? Management. So he was vilified in Philly. I also remember reading that he had aspirations for being a singer. He had a group at one point, and he actually wasn't a bad singer. But all the reviews were terrible, mostly by white so-called musical experts. Um, but Dick Allen as a ball player, when he was in the right situation and management left him the fuck alone and sort of put him in a position where he didn't was drained defensively, because by the 70s all the injuries had took a toll on him and he wasn't really good defensively anymore. But offensively, you know, he was brilliant. So when they put him at third base or first base, which doesn't require as much movement, especially first base, he flourished. In 1972, he won the league MVP with the Chicago White Sox. He had 37 home runs, batted well over 300, 113 runs batted in, and 99 walks that year. Now, these numbers don't jump out at you by today's standards, but for the era, that would be like hitting now 55 home runs, driving in 140 RBI, being walked 150 times. I mean, it was unbelievable numbers. Goose Gossage, one of the great pitchers of all time, said that Dick Allen was the best player he ever saw. And Goose Gossage played for 20 years. Um, when you look at the era that he played in, larger ballparks, um, pitchers had an advantage with the mound. The mound was higher, so pitchers had an advantage over the hitters at that time. They call that era the second dead ball era. You know, um, you can see it. Runs, home runs, batting averages, it all dropped during the 1970s. Um, but even in that era, he stood out. And this is an era that included Reggie Jackson and Norm Cash, Gorman Thomas, uh, Dave Kingman, George Foster, Willie Stargell. This is an era that had premier power hitters, but he stood out. He was considered the strongest man in baseball. And, this is also an era where you had many prolific power pitchers. Now, of course, things are more complex today, and I would say that never has in Major League Baseball it's been more difficult to score in the later stages of games, because now you have it's almost like a platoon of closers now that end games. Um, so it's much more difficult with all these fresh arms throwing 97, 98, 99, 100 miles per hour today, as opposed to back then. You might have one guy pitch a whole game or 8 innings, and then a closer. Um, but still, for the era, you had many premier power pitchers. Your Nolan Ryans, your Steve Carlton, your Goose Gossage, excuse me, I mentioned, Bob Gibson, J.R. Richard, um, Sam McDowell. So there were some strikeout artists back then. To a lesser extent, Blayhaven, Bert Blyhaven. I always have issues with his fucking name. Bert Blyhaven with the Minnesota Twins was a bit of a power pitcher, but not quite as much. So, but still, like the hit 351 home runs in a career where you've been robbed of hundreds of games due to injuries is very impressive. If he had not missed so many games, he would have easily hit at least 450 home runs. At least 450 home runs, possibly closed in on 500. Um, be that as it may, he played in only what 13 seasons, I think, altogether. So when you take into account, if you look at advanced analytics and you really look at his career, it becomes more impressive. He had a much higher career batting average than Reggie Jackson. Much higher. I think he hit like 30 points higher than Reggie. He had more career home runs than Cecil Fielder or his son Prince Fielder or Darryl Strawberry. Um, and you know, when you look at his overall value for what he could do out there, you know what I'm saying? He hit for power, hit for average. Earlier on, he had speed. He was really good at driving runs home. You know what I'm saying? He was a clutch player, one of the best clutch players in the league. And, injuries is the only thing that robbed him. Toward the end, the last 2 seasons, he was a shell of himself. But I kind of equated to Mark McGwire. Like if he hadn't missed so many games, McGwire might have been the all-time home run king. If Dick Allen hadn't missed so many games due to, in my opinion, the Philadelphia Phillies misusing him um, and not letting him rehab from injuries more effectively, I think he would have hit, like I said, conservatively 450 home runs, probably 500, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. And if he played in today's era, it would be no contest. Look, to put this into better context about the eras I'm talking about, Reggie Jackson hit 563 home runs, right? But he never hit 30 home runs in consecutive seasons. Never. Because of that, it's just the era. The pitching was different. The everything was different. The ballparks, the ball itself, the equipment, everything. It just was not as easy to hit home runs back then as it is today. Um, but despite that, Dick Allen should have been in, and hopefully he will get in. It seems like he's going to have a fate similar to a Ron Santo. Ron Santo was a beloved third baseman with the Chicago Cubs back in the 60s and 70s. Had a long battle with juvenile diabetes that went all the way back from his 20s, when he was in his 20s till he died when he was, I think, what was he, 69, 70 years old. But unfortunately, Ron Santo died literally months before he was voted into the Hall of Fame. And I think that a similar fate is going to happen with Pete Rose. Pete Rose is getting up there too. I think he turns 80 soon, if he hasn't turned 80 already. I think what they're going to do with Pete Rose is they mean it when they give it. I think they mean it when they're going to give him a lifetime banishment. I think they're going to let him in, but it's going to be posthumously. I think it's going to be after he passes away. And that's unfortunate. You know what I'm saying? In Pete Rose's case, 31 years is enough. And with Dick Allen, 43 years is more than enough. Um, I think he's going to get in the Hall of Fame, but unfortunately, he's not going to be here. And sadly, Dick Allen is the latest of many, many ball players who have passed away this year. I'm trying to think of all the players that have passed away. You know, you have to put Al Kaline, Bob Gibson, Tom Seaver, Whitey Ford. There have been several others. I just can't think of off the top of my head the names, but there have been so many. Lou Brock is another one. There have been a lot of ball players that passed away now. Dick Allen has died at the age of 78. May he rest in peace.